Before we dive into our great conversation today, wanted to give a shout out to Dre Reed Spooky and Brooklyn Attic Books. In June, anyone that is in New York City or would be willing to travel, June 20th from 12 to 5 p.m. is the New York City Pride Indie Horror Book Fair. Over 30 LGBTQ plus authors, publishers, vendors will gather at TVI in Ridgewood's Queens, which is just steps off the L train. Come celebrate Pride Month with your literary horror besties. Festivities will include drag performances, movie screenings, carnival games, and raffle prizes. Food served by the award winning Luther's New York City, famous fried chicken sandwiches, and photo ops in TVI's infamous Room 237, the Shining themed lounge. There will also be an after party at the amazing bookstore Twisted Spine with readings from a few of the authors that will be attending the fair. This is hosted by friend of the pod, Dre Reed Spooky, and tickets are only $5. So make sure you're following Dre Reed Spooky and Brooklyn Attic Books. Click on the link in their bios to get your tickets. Welcome back to Horrifically Well Read, Bled, and Said. Today we are so excited to talk to Joshua Millican, author of Dopefoot, which is available everywhere now from Mad Axe Media. Welcome, Joshua.
Thank you. Yeah, I feel kind of squatchy today. Just soaking it all in, and really looking forward to hearing what people think about Dopefoot.
Yeah, that's awesome. So this episode's going to release Thursday, but today is Tuesday release day. What does it feel like knowing this is out there?
Feels great. Writing is such a lonely process. Before the book comes out, you work with a cover designer, a publisher, maybe a few editors, but it's a lot of just keeping secrets and not being able to have long conversations about what you're working on. So I love release day. I've already done about maybe like 6 or 10 podcasts, and you have to go around spoilers and things like. At this point, I say anything goes. Let's talk everything.
Love that.
It's like now. It's not like confusing you about something you can't get your hands on. Yeah, if we're talking about something spoilery, you can just pause, go pick it up, come on back.
Okay, well, that opens up some questions that I was going to have. So I love that. So, okay, you hear the name Dopefoot. You're probably thinking, what the hell is that? So, for any listeners out there that don't know what they're getting into, what should they know when they pick up Dopefoot?
Dopefoot, I think, is a magical title because it instantly marries Bigfoot with cannabis, and you know that you can have a wild time. It's about Bigfoot, and it is about Bigfoot belief, and it has a lot to do with the geography. Pacific Northwest has very unique geography and very strange parts of Redwood Gothic. It's a cryptid story, and it's kind of something that my publisher said recently, which I really liked. It's the found family trope gone horribly wrong.
Absolutely. Yeah, I can definitely agree with that for sure. It's funny because you talk about it's about belief in Bigfoot, which I think is really interesting because in your author's note, you kind of talk about your connection with like the very famous tape of Bigfoot
Hmm.
and just sort of belief in general and whether it even matters if that video is real or not. So just wanted to, what is your past and your experience with Bigfoot that brought you to sort of like exploring all this?
I love that question. Yeah. When you grew up in the 80s and 90s and you saw the Patterson Gimlin film on TV, it was always presented as something that was probably real. It was much easier to believe before the internet and before all these internet sleuths, and before all this technology to see things at night, and trail cams and drones and everything. So it was really easy for me to believe that there was something out there, and I've been shown this Patterson Gimlin film on exploration history shows since the beginning of my consciousness. So it was only as an adult that I kind of grudgingly came to feel like it's probably unlikely that there is a species. But of course, that just led me to think more about what Bigfoot was or what he represents. And it's still, there's a lot to peel back. And you're right, even if the Patterson Gimlin film is not real, there are thousands of personal experiences that people have logged, people who feel that they have seen something authentic. And I think it all has to do with the fact that certain geographies are kind of triggering for us as humans, fear of a larger alpha primate in a environment where we're not the masters. So, I'm not one of those skeptics who loves tearing down other people's beliefs. I don't believe in Bigfoot, but I would be delighted if we discovered that he's real. I think the world would be a much more exciting place. So, I hope I'm wrong.
No, I love that. And, well, it's really interesting the way that you explore this. The sort of prologue to the book is one of the like biggest believers basically having an experience where he questions it and sort of you kind of find out later that he's come to the conclusion, kind of like you said, that probably isn't real. And
Mhm.
like, I love that first scene with Harmless, our main character, where he goes to the Bigfoot, museum and you go there thinking, this is the number one belief, place in Bigfoot.
Yeah.
And the guy's like, "Hey, welcome. Bigfoot's not real." And I
Yeah,
just
he's like
love
a
that.
priest who's lost his faith.
Exactly. I love that juxtaposition. And it sort of like, sets up this whole thing within the book of, what is real, what's not. Cause I feel like between this character and kind of the character of Old Man, there's a lot of like philosophical thoughts within this sort of like insane things that are happening. And so I
Mhm,
love like at
mhm.
the very beginning, you've got this juxtaposition of the biggest Bigfoot place in the world with the guy saying he doesn't exist. And sort of just when you were bringing this book together, those two parts there, what was it beginning this way for you that was like important to do it?
Yeah, I really struggled with the prologue that you're mentioning. Originally, when I originally wrote it, Robert Patterson was a character in it, and I, like, wrote this
Oh.
whole deathbed confession where he
Mhm.
fesses up. And I realized I didn't wanna do that because, like I said, I don't want to stomp on anyone's beliefs. And I'm not
Mhm.
gonna make up any, incriminating evidence that doesn't exist because that's me putting my spin on it. So I decided it was more important to find a character who exemplified, Roger Patterson's belief and the belief that Roger Patterson inspired. Yeah, I knew that horror fans and cryptid fans would want something kind of exciting to kick it off with. I'm a
Mhm.
big fan of slow building dread, and there's plenty of that. The majority of the first act is just building tension and misdirection. But I knew that people kind of like want something exciting in those first 10 pages. And I tried to give them something exciting that, it plants a seed that pops up further through throughout the novel.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was something I came to through a lot of thought, through the help of
Mhm.
editors, just
Yeah.
trying to find something that would set the scene in a way that honored the themes and Bigfoot belief in general.
Yeah, and I think it does. I wanna come back to that sort of, like, things that you think are what they aren't really, and sort of the way people use that, I think comes into play a lot for a few of these different groups that you kinda talk about. But before we even get there, I wanna talk about this, like, Emerald Triangle, Green Curtain, Humboldt County, like, this
Mhm.
area is just it's like the Wild West. It's like an entire different, like, world. It's so many different things, and you really, like, give us that sense of place of like anything can happen here, anyone can live here. It's like lawless, but has its own rules at the same time. What is so magical about this area?
There's no place like it. Redwoods only grow in one place in the world, and that's the Pacific Northwest. That's Northern California through southern Canada. It's the unique energy, the liminal spaces that these huge trees create, and the vastness of this wilderness between Northern California and Canada is really unfathomable. What was the question again? I sometimes go off track.
So like you come when you introduce it, he's in the museum, I think, and on the wall it says, the Emerald Triangle, more disappearances here than
Right,
any place
right.
on Earth. And it's just setting up that he's in a place that's gorgeous, beautiful, magical, and dangerous as hell.
Yeah, I don't
Yeah,
know if
I
you're
don't know if you're
familiar with the
familiar with the
documentary Murder
documentary Murder
Mountain
Mountain
that came
No.
out
came
on
out on
Netflix.
Netflix.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
basically
it's
the
basically
seedy
the
side
seedy
of the
side
cannabis
of the
industry.
cannabis
And
industry.
I
Okay.
pulled a
I
lot of
pulled a lot
my
of my
a lot of my
a lot
knowledge
of my
comes from
knowledge
that.
comes from that.
I have
I have
some
some
friends who are in the
friends who are in
cannabis
the
industry.
cannabis
I've heard
industry. I've heard
stories.
stories.
I combined some
I
elements of
combined some
things they
elements
told
of
me,
things they told
and I
me,
made some
and
things
I
up
made some
that
things
you
up.
can check
But
out if
you can
you
check
wanted to
out
do
if you
some
wanted to do
free
some
Dopefoot
free Dopefoot
research. You
research.
could watch
You
Murder
could watch
Mountain. I
Murder
think it's
Mountain.
4 or
I think
5
it's 4 or 5
episodes on
episodes on
Netflix,
Netflix,
and it really
and it
shows you
really shows you
the alternative
the
side
alternative
of the
side
cannabis
of the
industry.
cannabis industry.
But it's also
But it's
really
also
interesting 'cause,
really interesting.
historically,
Historically,
the cannabis
the cannabis
industry is
industry
in a very
is in a
strange
very
place.
strange place.
Legalization was supposed
Legalization
to
was
make
supposed to make
things
things
better, but
better.
it really just kind of
Really
expanded the
just kind
black
of expanded
market.
the
There are
black
so
market.
many,
There's so many
nuances to
nuances to
cannabis
cannabis
and
and
the cannabis
the cannabis
industry and,
industry, and
just the whole
just the whole
Wild West
wild west
mentality.
mentality.
I
The-
It's a very
It's a very
complex,
complex,
endless string to
almost string to
unravel.
unravel. Yeah, and that's interesting. And you talk about that slow burn, and I love how it's multiple chapters of Harmless just getting to the goat farm, right? And it's
Right.
like he's blindfolded Right. for some of it. It's terrifying. He's pretty sure the driver's on meth as they're driving. This is
Mhm.
just this wild scene of like, am I even gonna survive getting to this place? And it really just builds. By the time you get there, you're ready for whatever kind of insane things are going to happen. At least you thought you were. And then you go to places that I was like, I don't know what's going to happen in these next pages, but I can't wait to see. So
Oh.
I want to talk about sort of, I guess, if there are heroes of the story, I guess it would be our friends at Goat Farm. So you really, I want to know, these characters, are they based on real life figures, or sort of like you said, some of these stories? But I love, you've got Mother Agatha, who's sort of
Mhm.
like the leader, and she's this like terrifying, but also at the same time seemingly caring, person. And then Honeydew, who just like, she has clearly just insane amounts of trauma in her life.
Mhm.
You got Loco, who's like the really cool dude who you think, his name is because he's probably like this crazy fighter or something. And then when you find out what it is, you
It's
realize
an obscene
this is just a really
contraction.
cool dude. Exactly. And then Old Man, who's just a fascinating guy who, like you said, he was born addicted to drugs, kind of had this like near death experience. And now he's like this basically Zen master. And I just love this sort of family. And then obviously we don't see them as much, but are mentioned Papa, which is
Mhm.
mother's
Mhm.
husband, and Windows, who are off in this other place. But when you said this found family gone very wrong, when you first meet up with everyone, there is this kind of like beautiful relationship that's going on with all of them, that I thought was
Yeah, and
really
it's a
cool.
real
So I just
sense
want
of
to hear,
relief
yeah.
too, after what
Yeah.
he was talking about with Harmless's trip
Trip
up to,
up
the
to,
farm. He
the
was
farm. He
like,
was like,
"Okay, I'm
okay, I'm
really
really
walking to my
walking to
doom
my
right now,"
doom
and then
right
it's
now.
like
And then
a
it's
new
like a
day,
new
and it's
day, and
beautiful,
it's
and these
beautiful, and
people are
these people are
so
so
interesting, and
interesting,
he
and
thinks he really
he
left out
thinks he
for a
really
minute
left
there.
out for a minute there. Yeah, yeah, definitely. And it's really interesting when you talked about sort of like, I love like the sort of relationship with truth even within Goat Farm, because like you said, it is the Wild West. It is a lot of black market. People are stealing from each other. So they basically have had to make themselves seem terrifying, like these Satan worshiping, sacrificing of animals and people
Mhm.
potentially kind of group, where really they're just trying to make some money, right?
Right, yeah, I mean, there are
Right. Yeah,
so
I mean,
many
there are
weird,
so many weird,
mental,
mental
gymnastics going on with these
gymnastics going on
characters.
with these characters.
Old Man, I
Old
love
Man,
that guy
I
to
love
death,
that guy to
because
death,
first of all,
because
he's
first of
not
all,
an old
he's not
man,
an
right?
old
He's
man,
the
right?
youngest
He's the
character
youngest character
in
in the
the crew,
in the
and,
crew,
he
and
he says he's
he says he's
sober even though
sober, even
he
though
smokes
he
pot
smokes pot
and
and
meth.
meth.
He
He
considers himself
considers
sober
himself
as long as
sober
he
as long
stays
as he
off
stays
horse
off horse
tranquilizers.
tranquilizers.
It's a lot of,
A
like,
lot
this
of
weird,
like this weird,
things are and
things
aren't
are
what
and
they
aren't what
appear.
they
He
appear.
is
He
old
is
man, but
old
he's
man,
not
but
an
he's
old
not an
man.
old man.
He
Yeah.
claims
He
to be
claims to
sober,
be
but
sober,
he's
but
not
he's not
technically
technically
sober.
sober.
So, there's
So,
a lot of,
there's a
like,
lot of like,
you can say
you
one
can say
thing,
one
but
thing,
your
but your
actions speak
actions
another
speak
way, or
another
vice
way, or vice
versa.
versa.
And that plays
And
into
that
the whole,
plays into the
whether
whole,
or not
whether or
Bigfoot
not
is quote
Bigfoot
unquote
is quote unquote
real,
real.
because, even
Because
if you
even if you
remove
remove
the the primate, there's something deeper when you look into the whole Bigfoot phenomenon.
Absolutely. And when we meet Harmless, he kind of says like he's drifting. Like we find more about him as it goes along. He's a much more interesting character than this sort of like everyman audience POV than we really expect him to be at the beginning. But I love that he kind of tells himself that he's like this sort of mixture of like Hunter S. Thompson and these other, the guy from Into the Wild, and
Mhm.
there's some Jack Kerouac and like
The
I don't know,
Barefoot
Richard.
Bandit.
Yeah, Barefoot Bandit, like, mixed in there, but it's sort of interesting because it's like he wants to be part of this sort of, like, culture and time that doesn't exist anymore if it ever did, right? But it's like the realities of, like, the situation of modern times, like, comes
Mostly
up
off the
and
grid fantasy, where you
Yeah.
think that, you're gonna thrive by removing yourself from the things that pull you down in society, and most people get into the wild and realize they're, vastly ill-equipped to thrive.
Yeah, because ultimately it is really scary. Like, you have to be able to do some things you maybe don't expect you are gonna have to do to survive, and that kinda brings in I'm gonna talk about the sort of, 2 main other groups before we get into the last
Yeah.
one, which I wasn't gonna bring up, but if you said we can, I wanna talk
Oh,
about
we
that last group.
absolutely can. Let's
But
talk about it all.
yes. So, the Boilers and the Lithuanians, which, like, I just love this idea of these sort of, like, Eastern Europeans that are, like, because they got money, they got time, they got access to things, that they just buy up all this land and kinda set up shop in a place that's so foreign to them, and, like, their way of doing things in this just sort of, like, Cold War that's going on between these 3 groups. Like, did that come from any kind of reality of the way things happen in, like, these situations?
Yeah, yeah, in cannabis culture, especially when you go out into the wilderness, there's always the fear of, theft. They call them rippers because they just
Mm.
go into farms and they rip up as many plants as they can and they pull them out. And in terms of the Lithuanians coming in and buying everything up, that actually was one of the consequences of legalization. All of a sudden, anyone could make their way into industry where you used to need strong community ties. Community ties became irrelevant when it became a business. And
Hmm.
in the Murder Mountain documentary, which I mentioned before, there's this one scene where the sheriff goes like, "We've got Bulgarians up there with arms." I thought that was so funny, and I didn't want to take Bulgarians specifically, but that is where I was like, okay, well, I'm just going to think of something else, because you don't think of Bulgarians as like scary, and I didn't
Yeah.
think of Lithuanians as like inherently scary, but it was like, okay, I'll make them these drug barons, and yeah, these rippers who I call boilers now because basically they set up these like moonshine stills. They boil the weed down to its essence so that they can fly it out in drones a lot easier. I made all that shit up. I don't know if that's real, but they are like the locals who feel like they have the ties to the land, and their families created this industry, and they're very resentful of these
Yeah.
outsiders who come in. They even bring their own labor, and then they take all the product and they ship it back overseas. So they come into the community and don't enhance it in any way. They just exploit it.
Yeah, it's basically the way capitalism ruins everything, right?
And
So
the area in Northern California has a long repeating history of this. Yeah, and Old Man talks about it. Before the Green Rush, there was
Mhm.
the link to the timber industry. There's the
Yep.
gold rush. There's colonialization. It's a very violent area.
Yeah, and, no matter what your beliefs are and things, it's like that I feel like always when a place has a violent sort of history, it kind of seeps into everything around it and, like, creates that.
Absolutely, that
Yeah.
energy doesn't just vanish. You feel
Yeah,
those echoes.
absolutely. Yeah, and I just love the way the Lithuanians turn into almost like Apocalypse Now style, like insane, army characters where and it's
Yes.
funny because it just like to me it reflects 2026 so much where it's just like, what's the answer? Just destroy everything, right? It's like
Mhm.
you're trying to save it and or keep it, and your answer is to blow up as much as possible. And it's like, if that's not just a reflection of where we're at right now.
Right, if they can't have it, no one can.
Yeah. And, taking themselves down and not even, like, thinking twice about it is so crazy to me. But it's interesting because you talked about that, and it's, with drugs in general, obviously the community of cannabis and all of those things play a huge part in this book. And I love the fact that it's not like I wouldn't it's not glorified, it's not demonized, it just is, right? And it's
Right.
like even the way that they take, they smoke meth before they go work because they got to work their asses off. And it's very almost nonchalant and just the norm.
Well, I was really nervous, about glamorizing meth use, because
Yeah.
I don't want anyone, at any age to read this and go, "What? I can smoke meth and be like a superhero?" No, no. These characters are all doing mental gymnastics to justify this.
Mhm.
It's not healthy, and it's clearly leading into their hostilities and their paranoias and their
Yeah.
reactions to danger. And I wanted to be kind of like nonchalant neutral about meth,
Yeah.
even though it's very anti-meth. And I hope
Mhm.
that it's obvious enough that the a lot of the hallucinatory aspects, a lot of the bad decisions people are making has to do with the fact that they are not seeing clearly, they're not processing the world clearly. It's all part of a big mess. By the end, Harmless hasn't slept in what, like 40 hours, and that's when all the craziest shit in the book is happening. And it's just like,
Yeah.
what is going on?
Right, exactly, and it's very much obvious, as the reader that what's happening here in general is not gonna be sustainable, right? Like,
Right.
something's gonna happen at some point, and, we get to witness the horror of all those things that kind of happen, and Harmless is the lucky one to get there right as the shit's hitting the fan with
Right.
everything.
Quote unquote
Um
lucky.
Yeah, exactly. One thing that I love that old man says, when he talks about I think there's always people's talk about, "Oh, I'm spiritual, not religious," right?
Hmm.
And I don't think I've ever heard it, like, put as well as him saying, "Religion is for people who are scared of hell, spirituality is for those of us who have already been there." And, like, I know I just read that and I was like, "Man," like, that kinda nails that whole, like, feeling, doesn't it?
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Because spirituality is just something more personal and inherent. It's not about fear; it's about acceptance.
Yeah, and Old Man, like, one of his superpowers, as it were, is really just almost empathy, right? That he's
Yeah.
able to, like, find the words that when someone's either in horrible pain, either mentally or physically, that he's able to comfort them, and I love that
Mm.
that kind of, like, gives him this, like, exalted status that he basically is able to make people feel comfort.
Yeah, yeah. He's intuitive to the point of clairvoyance.
Mhm.
He can kind of mesmerize people. So yeah,
Yeah.
he's just very in tune to the emotions. Yeah, empathy, like you said, empathy and intuition.
Yeah, I love that. And then there's Honeydew, who is, this really, she's like, when you first meet her, she's like meek and you think all of these things, but she really is fucking tough as nails, and I love all of her quirks and, you sort of get to know her story as it goes along. And I just think that she's a really fascinating character that you put in there and just wanted to kind of think of your thought process as you were fleshing her out.
Yeah, well, and I knew from the get-go that this book was gonna succeed or fail based on the characters,
Hmm.
not the creature.
Yeah.
I had to make sure that the characters were at least as interesting as the creature, and my goal was to make their, story more interesting than any normal Bigfoot, you know, cat and mouse situation, that had to kinda be secondary. There had to be something more compelling than just that.
Yeah.
But Honeydew, just kind of developed. I don't know where a lot of it came from, but I can tell you I had an alpha reader who, before I even gave it to the publisher, and, he told me that Honeydew was an iceberg, and he said that, she should be fleshed out even more. That's why I gave her her own chapter. One of the few narrative flexes I do is I jump off of Thomas's shoulder and I give you Honeydew's POV for an entire chapter. It's one of the best chapters in the whole book. I think it comes in at a perfect time. It's like a perfect little interlude between acts of Dopefoot and yeah, she's kind of like the kind soul of the forest, and things don't work out for her, but in a sense, they work out better than they did for other characters.
That is true. Yeah, absolutely. I love that, the kind soul of the forest, and that's kind of what happens, right? Like, for her, that's really interesting. You kinda talk about switching off onto Honeydew's story, and, like, storytelling in general is, like, a huge part of this book they all kind of tell their stories as the book goes along. But then there's also this kind of like the legends of the area that are told too. So whether it's the opening prologue or, talking about the film in general, Sparkles the Clown, which is like deserves its own short film or something,
Mm,
like is an amazing story.
yeah.
I just love how much like storytelling within the main story is important and just wanted to kind of expand on that, especially like where they came from or, just sort of like when you meet somebody, it's like, okay, that's what you do. That's how you kind of get to know each other, right?
Yeah, I was
Yeah, I
really,
was really,
enamored by the
enamored by the
whole
whole
stories around the
stories around the
campfire
campfire
idea,
idea,
which they
which they
literally do.
literally
They sit
do. They
around the
sit
campfire
around the
and they tell
campfire and they tell
stories,
stories,
but there are,
but there are,
symbolic
symbolic
campfires, even if
campfires,
they're
even if
just
they're
sitting
just
around
sitting around
smoking
smoking
cigarettes,
cigarettes,
kind of like
kind of
that
like that
same sort of
same sort of
communal
communal
storytelling
storytelling
experience.
experience.
And, I
And, I
worry that the
worry that the
first
first
third of the
third
book
of the book
was
was
too
too
monologue-y.
monologue-y.
I know
I know
monologue-y isn't
monologue-y
a
isn't a
word,
word,
but, like,
but
I was
I was
afraid that
afraid
people
that
were
people
gonna,
were gonna,
get
get
bored, think
bored,
that this
think
was
that
just
this
too
was
much
just too
talk,
much
not
talk,
enough
not enough
action.
action.
I'm glad to
I'm
hear,
glad to
though,
hear,
that,
though, that,
people are
people are
connecting with those
connecting with those
aspects of it
aspects
as
of
much
it
as
as
I
much
hoped
as I
they
hope
would.
they would. Absolutely, it is. It's like it's like the most interesting people telling you like the craziest stories because Loco's story is scary as hell. Like that is
Yeah,
like
and
such a
this
great
is like the
story.
411 forest
Forest
horror
horror
experience. It's missing
experience. Yeah.
411.
Yeah, and these stories like Sparkles the Clown or him being followed by these supposed women, all up the entire like Pacific Coast Trail and stuff. Like, are these just kind of like bits and pieces of things you heard? Are they completely fabricated? Like, where did that stuff come from?
A lot
A
of it are
lot of
bits
it are
and
bits
pieces
and
of
pieces
things
of
I
things
heard.
I heard.
I even
I even
reference Murder
reference Murder
Mountain, for
Mountain, for
example,
example,
in
in
Dopefoot.
Dopefoot.
Probably
Probably is
subtly. You have
subtly.
to
You
see
have to see
Murder Mountain
Murder
to be
Mountain
able
to
to
be
tell.
able to tell.
But yeah,
Yeah,
these are things
these
that
are
I'd
things that
heard,
I'd heard,
stories from like
stories from like
Missing
Missing
411. There are a
411.
lot
There
of
are a lot of
Appalachian
Appalachian
Trail horror
Trail horror
stories, a lot
stories,
of
a lot of
Pacific Coast
Pacific
Trail
Coast
horror
Trail horror
stories.
stories.
There are a lot of
There are a lot
hints
of hints
like
like
serial
serial
killers on the
killers on the
trail,
trail,
cults on the
cults on the
trail,
trail,
crazy people
crazy
on the
people on the
trail.
trail.
So yeah,
So yeah,
I did
I did
pull that
pull that
in, and
in,
then
and then
towards the end,
towards
it's
the
just
end,
kind
it's
of
just
like a
kind of like a
smorgasbord free
smorgasbord
for
free
all
for
with
all with
staircases in the
staircases in the
woods and
woods and
lost
lost
societies
societies
and
and yeah.
anything else I could
Else I
think
could
of.
think of. So that's what I was gonna say. We take a hard right turn into an Italian cannibal movie at one point, and it's sort of this again. It's just as disturbing as they might be to Harmless and us as the audience. They kind of just know they're there, right? Like they've made a treaty with these people and all this kind of stuff. But it really is fascinating to think that there could be a place in quote unquote civilized country that is that wild. And I think that
Right.
that's something that people are fascinated by, terrified by, and drawn to at the same time, right?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. So I want to talk about okay, so Harmless gets thrown into a pit.
Hmm.
And it is one of the most horrifying good job. Like,
Thank
it is
you.
one of the most disturbing. I was like, "Okay, put down any food during this section. If you're worried at any part in the first half that it's not gonna go there, just wait. It's going there
Be
very, very
patient.
soon." Yeah. So, was that a nightmare? Like, where in the hell did that come from?
Yeah,
Yeah,
you asked if
you
any of
asked
the
if any of the
characters are
characters
real,
are
and the
real,
only
and
one
the
who's
only one
kind
who's
of real
kind of
is
real is
Harmless because
harmless
you,
because
as a
as a
writer, he's the
writer,
one who
he's
I
the
put
one
the
who I
most of
put the most of
myself
myself
into,
into,
a younger
a
version
younger
of
version of
myself.
myself.
And yeah,
And
I
yeah,
wanted
I
to kind
wanted
of
to
like,
kind of like,
I like
I like
story arcs
story
where
arcs
there's
where there's
transformation, a
transformation, a
character
character
transformation.
transformation.
And I
And
believe
I
that
believe that
transformation needs to
transformation
be
needs to be
painful. I think
painful. I
that's one
think
of the
that's one of
things
the
in
things in
horror.
horror.
Transformation is
Transformation is
always
always
painful.
painful.
And so,
And
yeah,
so,
I knew
yeah,
that
I
this
knew that this
character was going to have
character
to
is gonna
go
have to
through
go through
something
something
just excruciating,
excruciating,
if not
if not
physically
physically
painful, then
painful, then
excruciating in some
excruciating in
other
some
way.
other
And
way.
a lot of it
A
was
lot of
just
it
kind
was
of
just
like
kind of like
putting
putting
myself in that
myself in that
situation. And it was
situation. And it was
tough.
tough.
There were a
There
couple
were a couple
times when I
times
was
when I was
close to
close
making
to making
myself
myself
sick.
sick.
I,
Yeah.
I think
I
when I
think when I
described the
described the
consistency of
consistency of
everything as like
everything
a
as like a
kiss, I think
fist,
I
I
had to
think I had
stop
to
for a
stop for a
second and
second
just
and
like
just like
control my
control
gag
my gag
reflex for
reflex.
that.
Yes.
Yeah, no,
Is that when you're
that's
doing
the
something
moment.
right when that happens? You know you're
Yeah, I
doing something
guess.
good?
And a few
A
people have
few people
already
have already
mentioned
mentioned
the
the
croon at the
croon
bottom
at
of
the
the
bottom
pit.
of the pit.
I think that's
I
just
think that's just
such a great
such a great
moment
moment
of
of
that's the
that's
first
the
just like
first just
really
like
like
really like
mind blowing.
mind
Oh,
blowing. Okay,
this is a
this is a
different kind of
different
book
kind
than
of
I thought I was gonna get.
there you go.
Looks like a
Looks like
froze
a
up
froze up
Rizzler.
for a second. Yeah, but yeah, that crone, just the idea that this person has been living in this for so long, I just, you know love that idea. I love how impossible, but at the same time, you're like, okay, you know, it
It's
is
almost
for
kind of like
the
just creeping up to the border of impossible because,
yes,
a 120-year-old person isn't impossible. It's highly improbable, but,
you think
it's
about
there.
like
It might be supernatural. It might just be a freaky thing.
yeah. Well, it's like if there's plants, on the bottom of the ocean that are being fed by carbon steam vents or whatever it is, it's like this could happen. Why not? I think it's also really like character-wise a really fascinating moment for everyone. But Mother Agatha has to make a decision in that moment. And looking out, like taking all emotion out of it, it's the decision I think it was pretty much the right one to make, right?
It was her only decision at that point, but
Yeah.
yeah, the point was that she had already made decisions like this
Mhm.
before.
Yeah.
She was already guilty. Her heart was already hardened. It was too easy for her, and
Yeah.
that's why she kind of meets the fate that she met. But yeah, I think the people who are most upset in that situation, besides the character harmless, are the readers. Because
Yeah.
I've set up this scenario that's basically like it's become an adventure, a gory,
Mhm.
scary adventure, and you think this is like a grown-up Goonies type crew,
Yeah.
and then all of a sudden, your main character's ripped away from these interesting people, and he's not going to be a part of their story anymore, and he is just so upset. And the readers, I've had readers who I was so mad at you when you put harmless in the hole. I was so mad, but
'Cause I
they're
think you're
not mad
even as the
by the
reader,
end.
you're still thinking he's gonna get rescued, he's gonna get pulled out, like, something's gonna happen last second, and you refuse to give that easy,
Mhm.
like, catharsis for that.
Yeah, because it's not that story. And I mean, the only real comfort, I guess you could say, from Harmless's perspective, is that it wasn't just his end with the group; it was the end of the group.
Right.
But you don't realize that right away. You just feel like it's a fracture. It's like that moment
Mhm.
in Lord of the Rings where different subgroups go in different directions
Right.
and back. But it's not going to be that because it's not the Lord of the Rings. It's not that type of story.
Yeah, and I love that, Harmless, is he's made his journey now that he's no longer harmless, and you kind of almost even after that when it's like, oh, it's the end of the group and as the reader you might be like, okay, I'm glad of certain events that happen after that. Or if you're not glad at it, you're like, okay, there's some vengeance maybe or something. But Harmless doesn't get his, right? Which I think, seems like a purposeful decision too.
It was, and I
Yeah.
actually had my editor, Nico Bell, she was like, "You've gotta have, like, Harmless witness Mother Agatha's death, there has
Yeah.
to be that catharsis for him." And I was like, "No, it has to be, like, the anger that he didn't get to." But she's the
Mhm.
one who convinced me to give, Mother Agatha her on-page death, because
Yeah.
before, it was just, old man's like, "Yeah, she didn't make it,"
Mhm.
Harmless imagines a little bit, but he has no idea of the specifics. So she convinced me to give Mother
The found
Agatha,
footage
on
style.
page,
Yeah.
yeah, the found footage style, on page death. I think it worked out really well too, and it gave me a chance to throw in even more what the fuck moments, and I'm really glad I was pushed that way. But yeah, I think, the reader doesn't get united with the group, and the reader doesn't get to have revenge. But again, it's not about getting what you want, it's about getting the best story, in my opinion. And I hope that by
Yeah.
the end, he's upset about the fact that Harmless didn't kill Mother Agatha, because his fate is different than that, and, it's all bigger than them as individuals.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the ending of this book, that isn't even the ending. We get a lot of insanity after that, which kind of ties in again. It's like, you bring in sort of the events of the prologue in a really cool way and kind of mirror it in this really awesome, interesting sort of finale that, you know, our monster finally shows itself, but is it a monster? Was it ever a monster? Do monsters exist? Are we the monsters? You get to play with all of that in this like really
Mm.
awesome kind of final moments, right?
Right. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the epilogue too, it's like I kind of wanted to hint at everything I didn't even touch on, that was kind of my point too, that Bigfoot and Bigfoot belief is even bigger than what I give you into Dopefoot, because there are so many other avenues I could explore. As a writer, I'm always so sad when I finish a book and I feel guilty about what I did to some of the characters. I always imagine sequels in my mind, so they still exist somewhere. Even if I never write another book, at least I know that Honeydew is alive. At least I
Yeah.
know Ranger Mason is still creeping around out there.
What a
Stuff just
character. I
going
love that
on.
character.
Me too.
That's such a
He's like
cool thing.
kind of like the scene stealer in the third act.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's just very much like, I listen and read a lot about it. I'm on the Appalachian Trail here in Pennsylvania. So
Yeah.
read a lot about that and listen to like podcasts and stories. And it's like, there's just people that you're like, was that a fucking person? Like, who was that? Like, what is that? And I love, there's no real answers, there's no real, except you just know it's probably not good, whatever was going on there. And I just love that. I also love your reference to Friday the 13th, 4 and 6 being the best, 6 being my personal favorite.
It's a good one. Yeah,
And
me
I
too. That one's got
especially yeah.
Frankenstein with the electricity bringing them back to
Yes.
life.
The only one with campers in the entire franchise too.
Exactly. The only one that takes place during the summer camp season.
And I love
My
that, yeah.
previous books are kind of like loaded with horror movie Easter eggs, and this one I really reeled it back, except I
Yeah.
couldn't resist throwing in my personal theory that Jason Voorhees is a cannabis farmer.
You know, that's
That's why he kills
very,
his stomach
very
first.
true.
He thinks they're stealing his weed.
Makes sense. Absolutely. Somebody needs to make that Jason 11, whatever we're on. So
Exactly.
definitely. Speaking of your previous books, I just wanted to throw in there that Teleportasm is one of my favorite of the Killer VHS. I like when I saw this book was coming out, I was like, oh, I need this because I still think about so many scenes in that book, which
Thank
is
you.
just,
Thank you.
insane.
Yeah,
Like, I love that.
Teleportasm's still very near and dear to my heart. It still sells a lot at conventions,
Getting
and
a
the Killer
new,
VHS series has grown in popularity.
yeah,
So
it's
I'm
getting a
glad
new
you've checked that
edition,
out too.
right, too?
You
So,
know, Teleportasm is a comedy. Dopefoot is a drama.
mhm.
So you can't really put them in the same bag. But that isn't to say that Teleportasm doesn't have dramatic moments, or that Dopefoot isn't funny. I think
Yeah.
Dopefoot has some very funny moments. I think the funniest thing I did was create a character named Windows, and as soon as you meet him, he's in a million pieces. He's a broken Windows. He's a broken Windows. So that was kind of like I don't know. I thought I was kind of fun to myself with that one.
I love
Anyway, we do
characters.
kind of have to
Yeah.
wrap it up, though. I'm going on to my next thing, but a final question for me or anything?
Yeah, so, I would just wanna know how are you, sort of celebrating the release and what's next?
Thank you for asking. Yeah, I'll be at Sinister Creature Con in Sacramento this weekend. That's the 20th and 21st at the Scottish Rite Center. It's a great Northern California horror convention focused on the special effects and the artistic elements of horror cinema. But it's also, for horror aficionados of all breeds. So I'll be there on the weekend. And then on Tuesday the 23rd, if you're in Northern California, Sacramento, you can see me at Bloodstone Books. I'm going to be doing a panel with Bear Corella and Allison Pick. Also, Pacific Northwest Forest Horror authors. And then I've got another event with Corella at Word Horde Emporium in Petaluma, also in Northern California. So, I got a bunch of things going on. Follow me on Instagram to keep up on all of this. And, hopefully I'll just keep bouncing around to conventions and readings and signings and events all summer long and into the fall.
Perfect. We're talking a bitter tomorrow, so Quaint Folk, another awesome book
He
that's
is
coming out. Yeah.
amazing. You're
Yeah, love
lucky.
that.
Moonflow is just
Oh,
batshit.
fantastic. Love it. Yeah, so, well, congratulations, all the best of luck to you, and, hopefully we can talk again soon.
I hope so. Thank you so much for having me on. I really
Yeah.
appreciate you.
Sure, thank you. Yep, have a good one.
All right, take care.
Bye.